This is episode 379 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Stephen White, an archaeologist at Archaeology Southeast, UCL. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend, Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
He that eats my capon shall know me better. All's Well That Ends Well, Act 2, Scene 2 is talking about the roasted to perfection and served at noble feasts capon. This is a castrated rooster prized for its tenderness and rich flavor. It was one of the most luxurious poultry options available in Shakespeare's England. While today the word may be unfamiliar to many, in the 16th and 17th centuries, the capon was a delicacy, frequently mentioned in early modern literature, including a dozen times across Shakespeare's plays. But what did it mean culturally and culinarily to serve a capon in the Elizabethan era? How were they raised, and what status did they hold in society? What was their appearance in Shakespeare's works intended to reveal about daily life and dining customs of the time? To help us explore the fascinating world of capons, roosters, and poultry practices in Renaissance England, our guest this week is food historian and prolific author Ken Albala. Dr. Ken Albala is the Tully Knowles Endowed Professor of History at the University of the Pacific, where he specializes in food history and early modern European culture. He has authored over 25 books, including Eating Right in the Renaissance, Food in Early Modern Europe, and Cooking in Europe from 1250 to 1650. Dr. Albala has also produced several lecture series for the grade courses, such as Food, A Cultural Culinary History, and Cooking Across the Ages. His research offers deep insights into the culinary practices and societal norms of the Renaissance period. Before we dive into today's conversation, I want to let you know that there's bonus visual history you can explore while you're listening to the show, and it's available for patrons of That Shakespeare Life. These extras include period recipes for capon, 16th century paintings of roosters, and other visual resources on Renaissance cuisine. Just click the Patreon buttons at cassidycash.com/episode 379 to log in or join us if you're not already a follower of our show, and you can follow along as you listen. And now, let's dive into the history. Hello, Ken. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Thanks for having me.
Interestingly, as I was researching this episode, I could not find a reference in Shakespeare's plays where he ever used the word rooster. I found 6 uses of the word chicken, at least a dozen uses of capon, and then, of course, he calls the bird a cock at 80 different times. He uses this one, but he never uses the word rooster. With that note, Ken, please explain for us why it's missing from Shakespeare's plays, and then tell us about what a capon actually is and how it might be different from some of these other words we're using to describe a regular rooster or a chicken.
Sure. Well, a rooster, the word itself, the earliest recorded use is only the late 18th century. So Shakespeare is out of the question, and it really doesn't come into use until the 19th century. What I gather, and I'm not sure this is true, is that the word cock, as it has today a double meaning, was deemed to be offensive by some people, and they chose something else. The word to roost is Old English. That's always been around, but referring to the bird, a male bird, as a rooster, because they sit up on the rafters and top of houses and things, that doesn't come in until long after Shakespeare. And the word, the full word would be cockerel, is a male chicken, but cock is the more usual one. And when Shakespeare refers to it, it's almost always the rising of the sun, and the cock crowing, or drown the cocks, which are on the top of the steeples. And if there's a deluge, it should drown the cocks. But what a capon is quite different. The capon is sterilized surgically. It's a very easy procedure to do. You just poke a little hole in the belly, I'll show you right here, and then you basically just remove its testicles. And what that does is very much the same thing that would happen when you get your cat or dog spayed or neutered, is it becomes very docile, it grows much bigger, and becomes more tender. It happens to an ox too. An ox, a bull is really cantankerous and angry, whereas an ox is much bigger and peaceful. So this happens to the capon. you really only need one rooster for a brood. You'd have a lot of hens and one rooster is plenty. So what they would do is castrate the other ones, and then they won't fight with each other. Testosterone makes them, belligerent. And it turns out that not only do they grow much bigger, but the flesh becomes much more tender and tasty, and they grow fattier. So that's all good things from a gastronomic perspective. Now, the question that people always ask me is, why don't we do capons anymore? And in fact, it's because for commercial production, it's so quick. And nowadays, it happens in 6 weeks. We have a chicken ready to go. Is that there's really no difference. By the time that's long before you would caponize a rooster. It's before maturity. So it wouldn't really taste that different. And to raise a bird for a couple of years as a capon would be so expensive. And some people actually do it. Every now and then, Christmas, you can find a frozen capon somewhere. And I have tasted them. They're delicious. But the cost is just prohibitive. And then it's not that much different than a chicken that you would, pay $50 for a capon, and $10-15 for a chicken. So I think it's just a matter of rearing them.
How old are they when you said 6 weeks is too young? How old would they normally be?
Yeah, it's before maturity. So it's a couple of months, probably. Okay. Certainly before they reach full maturity, which I think is a year or so. But nowadays, what we do, especially for commercial egg laying, is that they consex the chicks and they just destroy the male chicks, because obviously they don't lay. They just literally put them in a chopper and get rid of them. It's horrible. Ooh. But in the past, you'd let them wander around. They feed themselves like chickens do. But the capons that were really prized in the past were crammed. In other words, they would actually put them in a hen house. Sometimes they would actually blind them, sew their eyes shut or poke their eyes out, and feed them as much as they possibly can, cramming them in the throat like you would do a duck or goose for foie gras. And the idea was that they would be anemic and only gain weight and never fly and never, do the chickeny things that chickens do. So they are not ridiculously expensive. I mean, they're not imported or anything. Anyone can do this. It's just a matter of, time and expense, really. And that's why it's considered a luxurious food, not because it's terribly expensive. But what I would add about capons, more than anything else, is their reputation is really not so much as being a luxury food, but being a healthy food, being the thing that is most temperate and balanced. So the real reason people loved capons was not because of their rarity or expense or, association as a luxury food. It's because they were considered healthy. A capon was a light meat, meaning that it was easily digested, light in color, light in texture, and people considered that it was humorally balanced. So it was good for any complexion, good for all sorts of people, any age, any gender. And people thought that it was also very nutritious. So, when you see menus for sick people, capon is almost always on there as a very nutritious thing that would be easily converted into your own flesh and healthy. So it's always number one in dietary books.
Well, why were they considered more desirable than roosters or even hens, I guess? Bone broth, for example, is considered healthy today. Why did it matter to have a capon instead of a hen?
Well, if you've ever eaten a rooster, they are very tough and gamey and smell a bit. And even an old layer, and imagine in the past, remember, they're not bred for breast size and for, the kind of chickens we raise today. They would be scrappy and thin and tough and best boiled. And so a capon is actually very delicate, much closer to the chicken that we know today. I think the ways that they cooked it also are very revealing. I mean, maybe you would have asked this question anyway, but I looked in some of the cookbooks, and Gervais Markham doesn't have a whole lot. I think the one that's most interesting is The Good Housewife's Handmade for the Kitchen, which has several different capon recipes. For sick people, they're usually boiled, which means just simmered. It's not hard boiled. It's just simmered gently. And then sometimes the flesh is picked off very clean into fine strands and then pounded, which is what you would make a blancmange out of, using almond milk and rice starch and sometimes rose water and sugar. That sounds very strange to our palates, but blancmange, blanc manger, is this very white, sweet, creamy chicken pudding. If that sounds palatable to you, it's actually very good. I've made it many times. A chicken
not too far off from what I think of as chicken pot pie, minus the breading and vegetables there.
Yeah, but it's all pounded very, very finely together. So it's smooth and soft in texture.
Okay.
The one that I find equally interesting is capon often goes into what's called baked meats. If you remember the passage in Shakespeare in Hamlet, where it's funeral baked meats that are served so quickly after his father's funeral that in his mother gets married to his uncle, they're serving the same food cold from the from the funeral, which is really weird. But the macabre thing is that they put it in what's called a coffin. A coffer, is what we would call it today, but it's a pie shell. And in The Good Housewife, the legs and wings are taken off, and it's put into a rye pastry crust and baked. And that's what they think of as a baked meat. Really delicious because all the moisture stays in. That's more like a pot pie, really. And then they roasted them, of course. They're roasting, not baking the way we do in an oven where you put it in. They would be on a spit and turned very slowly before the fire. So it kind of bastes itself. And interestingly, they would parboil it and then put it on the spit, because the idea is that a raw meat would cook on the outside much too quickly and would remain raw on the inside long after the outside kind of seized. And it slips actually on the spit also. So the idea is that you parboil it, and then the flesh is cooked through. It stays firm, and all the fat just doesn't run out into your pan. It actually stays on the bird, and it makes a delicious, delicious thing. Real roasting. The Good Housewife has a really interesting sauce that's made with eggs and lemon. And I think if you have ever had like an avgo limono sauce, like our soup from Greece, that egg lemon combination with some spices on roasted chicken is just perfect.
Is that anything I have not had an algolemono sauce, although I would love to try that. It's on my list of things to try, actually. But the hollandaise sauce is something I think of. How does it compare to like a hollandaise?
It doesn't. The hollandaise is very fatty and it's buttery. And obviously you can taste the butter, and there's just a hint of lemon, and it's emulsified, with fat. This is really
more tart.
Yeah, it's very tart and very smooth. And if you want to try and do it, just take some chicken stock, squeeze some lemon juice into it, beat your eggs, add some of the stock back into the eggs to temper them slowly and slowly and slowly, and then pour that back into the soup. And it thickens just slightly, and it's this tart, chickeny. It's lovely. And as a soup or as reduced more onto a sauce, onto a roasted chicken, is perfect.
Well, I'm definitely going to have to try that now. But as a luxury item, were capons associated with particular holidays or feast days?
I don't think so. I think they're more, if you can afford them, then it's something you would eat and serve along with roasted beef or a chine of beef or pork or something like that. And it's a sign of being well fed. I mean, you know the passage in, I think it must be, the ages of man. And by the time the guy gets, it's as you like it, right? Is Jacques? I think that's where it's from. Anyway, when the person becomes mature, it says his belly is round and filled with good fat capon. And that means, you finally made it in life and you have enough money to spend on good food. And that's, what it is. It's fatty compared to regular chicken. I think, let me share with you, though, the passage that I think is the most interesting. It's actually on my phone, so I won't quote it because I'm in fear of losing you if I try and go off. But Thomas Moffat wrote this wonderful book in the 1590s called Health's Improvement. And he says, I know people cram their capons and they keep them indoors. And he says, if you think this is good for the capon, obviously it's not. It makes them sickly. And that's going to also make you sickly. He said, look at their livers. They're misshapen and diseased. He says, much better is what we would call today a free-range chicken, a capon that he calls a gentleman capon, which of course means that he's not confined or in slavery, but that is fed on natural food, and that will make him healthier and it'll be healthier for you. And I find that just amazing that someone that long ago would understand the virtues of
exactly,
of free-range things. And he's also really against the cruelty also. I mean, he understands that it's just not
It's not okay to put him in a box and stuff food in him. Yeah.
It's not okay. And something I found out very recently, I didn't know that in Britain it's actually illegal to caponize chickens. Since 1982, it's been considered cruel and unusual. And, people can import them there, but they can't do the procedure in Britain anymore.
There's a reference in Hamlet. The title character has a line where he says, you cannot feed a capon so. And I wonder if that's a reference to this, if there was some kind of cultural controversy about how you were supposed to keep and feed your capons. I mean, you're sharing with us that there were at least two options.
Yeah. Well, it implies you're force feeding them, and if that makes something that's fattier and tastier, but ultimately not good for the capon or for you.
Do we have any inventories or banquet lists from noble households that mention capons specifically? Some examples of where these are appearing for Shakespeare's lifetime?
Yeah, they're always there. It's a standard requisite item in a banquet menu, and all of those that survive kitchen inventories, they always contain capons. There's no discussion of what it means to them really, apart from just that they have a variety of foods, and they would have wild game, and they'd have wild fowl, waterfowl, things that we don't eat anymore. But the preferred top of the list is always capon for its delicacy.
If you could serve a Shakespeare-themed feast with authentic dishes, how would you prepare the capon, and what would you serve along with it?
Well, I'm gonna refer back to the Good Housewife's Handmaid because this is one of my favorite recipes from it. But it's the capon is sieved, which just means very gently boiled. The breast is taken off, and the skin, I think, also. And the meat, which is very, very light and delicate, is served on sops. So that means that they have a piece of bread and the broth is poured on top of it. It's kind of like if you've ever had chicken a la king, which is a thing that came in a boiled bag when I was a kid. But they added all sorts of other flavors to it. They added cherries to it, or dams and plums. And I think that really interesting contrast between the delicacy of the meat and the sourness of the fruit is just delightful combination. So that's something that we would never think of doing in a million years today, but they certainly did.
Well, we've talked about roosters being useful as food for Shakespeare's lifetime, but were they kept for anything other than food, like cockfighting or alarm clocks, maybe? Did people get up with the crowing of their rooster?
Yes, that's exactly it. Is you would have a rooster around, obviously, to make checks with your hens, and there's an alarm clock, and there's warning when the cock crows. That means sunlight has happened, and that's exactly when they do it. People did not eat them, really. They would make them into capons so they taste better, because a cock is really just a stringy, gamey thing that you have to boil with a lot of wine, like coq au vin, to make it tasty. So you don't see it in recipe books. It's not something that was typically eaten.
So you lucked out, really, in the chicken world if you were the rooster that was selected to stay with the flock.
Yes, of course.
If someone wants to explore this subject on their own, where would you suggest they start?
I think look at the primary sources. People often suggest a secondary source, some history book, and there's plenty of those that are easy to find. But I would say go online and look at the books that are written at the time of Shakespeare, like Moffat, like Kogan, who writes another dietary, like Butts, who writes Diet's Dry Dinner. Look at the cookbooks, like the Good Housewife's Handmaid for the Kitchen, like Gervais Markham, like Platt, who you mentioned. And I think you'll find that they're very easy to search inside of. They've all been digitized, very easy to find. And if you're looking for a specific topic, just type in the word in the digitized version, and you'll find references that are not mitigated through some historian's interpretation. You're finding the primary source. And that's the way to do good history, because you quote them directly and say, here's what this person believed, which is true. It's not an opinion.
Always fun to do too, because you get to go, it's like a hunting for treasure for me. It's always fun to dig through and see what can I find here and what might they tell me.
Yeah.
Now, we will link to some of these primary resources in the show notes for today's episode. So if you're not sure where to start or you don't know where to find the digital copies of these, never fear. We will have you a link for where you can go directly to that in the show notes. So stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Now, can we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life? And that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
In addition to this, well, I have gotten tired of reading fiction. Don't ask me why. Although, one of my favorite books, I might bring 100 Years of Solitude, or I might bring The Master and Margarita, or something like that. But I have to say, one of my favorite books, and I was reminded of this thinking about this topic, is Thomas Moffat. His Health's Improvement is one of the funniest books. He's got a great sense of humor. Thomas Moffat, you might know, because the poem Little Miss Muffet it was sat on a tuffet, is supposedly about him. He was a arachnidologist. He studied spiders. But he wrote this book about health that's not published until long after he's dead. But it is so funny and witty and the quote I gave you about the gentleman capon comes from there. So I might bring that. I thought maybe Burton's, Anatomy of Melancholy, but I recently tried to read it. It's 1,500 pages or something crazy. I couldn't get through more than 100. So not Burton, although he's very elegant and lovely. I think, I'll take Moffat with me. Sure.
I think that's well worth bringing. I mean, Moffat has won so many points with me by his organic free range recommendations over 400 years ago. I think it's definitely worth seeing what else he has to say. So how much fun to explore that book for sure. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Gosh, well, I just finished an Atlas of Fermentation a couple of weeks ago, and I'm starting another show for the Great Courses, which is about forgotten foods. And I just finished up the first episode, which is about millet in Africa, fonio and teff and finger millet and pearl millet and all these wonderful varieties that no one really eats outside of Africa, which is fun. It's turning out to be a lot of fun.
That sounds fascinating. Actually, we eat millet here because my son has a gluten allergy. So we're incredibly familiar with millet in our house. So that sounds like a lot of fun to explore the history behind that. So very exciting. Thank you so much, Ken, for being here this week and taking us through the history of capons and helping us understand exactly what they were and what kind of place they had in Shakespeare's lifetime. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here and share it with us.
Great. So the links, I think the best ones are at the University of Michigan. All those books that I mentioned have searchable, digitized texts, and the Internet Archive has the originals if you want to see the typography.
Those are the places that I go. Yes. University of Michigan is great, especially because they usually transcribe everything. So it's easy to read. They'll have the text there. And then I'll kind of check it at the Internet Archive, because the Internet Archive will show you digitized versions of the pages. So you can see what the original book looked like over on Internet Archive and then be able to search the text a little bit better on Michigan.
And the very interesting thing that's happened recently, and I don't really know why or when this happened, most of those books were only available on Early English Books Online, and you had to be at a university that paid for it, which I've never been, well, except in grad school. So ordinary people just couldn't get a hold of them. And for some reason, Michigan has them now online. Yeah. To everyone,
so somebody was wheeling and dealing behind the scenes.
I don't know how that happened, but I'm very glad it did.
Yes, it's lovely. And Early English Books Online is an excellent resource for if you do have institutional affiliation where you can check those out. That one's definitely a good resource as well. Well, thank you so much again for being here. This was a fun conversation.
It was. Thanks.
That's it for this week. And so we tuck our napkins away and bid farewell to today's Feast of History. As we bring our culinary journey through the world of roosters and capons in Shakespeare's England to a close, we give our heartfelt thanks to Ken Albala for sharing his expertise and bringing the culinary world of the Renaissance to life. If you'd like to explore more of what we talked about today, including the historical recipes, links to Ken's books, and the primary resources that he mentioned, visit the show notes at CassidyCash.com/episode 379. While you're there, you can also unlock the visual extras for this episode, like 16th and 17th century paintings of capons on dinner tables and more, by clicking the Patreon buttons on the page. And if you're ready to roll up your sleeves and try your hand at Renaissance cooking, members of Experience Shakespeare on Patreon can download a full activity kit that walks you through preparing a capon just the way it was done for Shakespeare's lifetime. Again, that URL is CassidyCash.com/EP379. That's CassidyCash.com/EP379. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. Until next time, may your larder be full, your table graced with capons, and your mind ever open to the forgotten flavors of the past. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.